In this video, I'm going to discuss how to use the Thunderbird email program, newsreader, calendar. It's a multi-function program, very widely used. I've used it for many years to defeat internet censorship. And by censorship, I mean flat out banning of some content as has become increasingly frequent on YouTube, for example. Quite a number of video interviews with medical doctors, scientific researchers who are discussing the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic have been banned or have simply sort of disappeared. You can't find them, or it's very difficult to find them. Various other medical content, discussions of issues regarding influenza and pneumonia, which happens to overlap the current crisis, is also hard to find. I have some discussions of that on my own website. I'm going to discuss how to get around explicit banning like that, as well as shadow banning, deranking of content where it becomes very difficult or impossible. I'm going to talk about two things that you can do with Thunderbird. One is to subscribe to RSS feeds, which are news feeds, where you simply get from the source whatever they're putting out, and you're in control. You can use filters and other mechanisms in Thunderbird to rank the content, to delete content you don't care about, to control what you see directly from these sites. So you will typically realize they have a certain bias or a certain editorial position, but it's not hidden like with a Facebook news feed, for example, or Twitter, where you don't know what the algorithms from these giant social media companies are doing. You don't know how they are influenced by major advertisers that fund them, like the pharmaceutical industry, like companies involved in selling purported antiviral drugs or vaccines. So you want to bypass the social media gatekeepers. We don't know what Google is doing with their search results. The same applies to most search engines which are funded by advertising. They also seem to be pressured by the government in various ways. So I'm going to talk about using RSS feeds. I'm also going to talk about subscribing to mailing lists and how you can manage those mailing lists from different websites in Thunderbird. And also I'll talk some about the search capability in Thunderbird. So if you are subscribed to a good sample of different RSS feeds, different mailing lists, you'll collect a lot of information on your hard drive, which you can then search in the future when you want to find out about some new topic and not be dealing with the search engines like Google, which are controlled or funded by advertising and maybe hiding information from you. And it's become more and more apparent that they're doing that. Let me just discuss what I do here. I have a section that I call Home Blogs and Newsfeed. This is my personal news media, sources of different information. The presence of something here doesn't necessarily mean I trust it. In fact, everybody makes mistakes and everybody has biases, so in no way should you fully trust anyone. But secondly, some of them I have a higher opinion of than others, but I try to get a diverse range of opinions and information, including a lot of things that are not mainstream that might be called alternative or fringe. You can see some of those here. So I have everything all over the place here. I have Breitbart, which is kind of right wing. I have Democracy Now!, which is kind of left wing. I have the New York Times here. I have the Wall Street Journal, which I would also call a mainstream source. And it actually, a lot of things in the Wall Street Journal overlap with the New York Times. But generally, the Wall Street Journal is sort of conservative in the mainstream, and the New York Times is sort of liberal. There are actually many topics where they're very similar and where some of the coverage diverges from what, say, the alternative sources say, and in fact, what in my own research and personal experience is actually true. A notable example of that is both the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times promote the baseless, erroneous notion that there's a terrible shortage of scientists and engineers, and specifically computer programmers. And I've gone in a lot of other videos and articles into the strong evidence that this is not true. In fact, if anything, there's an overproduction, particularly of scientists, for example, physicists, which is what I got my Ph.D. in. That's a whole other discussion, but I just want to point out why one would go outside of the mainstream. Probably if you're listening to this video, I don't need to preach that too much, but I just wanted to explain that there's a very large range here. And again, the presence or absence of something here is not an endorsement of the views presented, nor does it necessarily mean that I consider a particular source highly reliable. This section has RSS feeds. These are RSS feeds. It also has folders where I route mailings that I get. So let's go back up to here, and we have this manages the RSS feeds. You can also create filters with this manage message filters. This is, by the way, Thunderbird 78.0, which is the most recent today. Today is July 18th, 2020. So first, let me start by showing how you can subscribe to an RSS feed and why that might be a good idea rather than using your Facebook news feed or a Google search. I'll demonstrate here how to subscribe to an RSS feed from a banned website if you like. RSS is an old technology that's been around for a long time. It's sometimes said to stand for really simple syndication or sometimes RDF site summary. It uses this icon, and frequently, as in the example I'll give, this icon has the link to the RSS feed for a website. That feed is very much like a mailing list, or indeed a bit like a Facebook feed or Twitter feed, where they send out links or they send out articles periodically. Some of them are very frequent. Smaller websites or alternative websites, it's often maybe once or twice a week, or even sometimes a few times a year. The advantage of this is it's direct between you in your email program or RSS reader program and the website. There's no Google in between. There's no YouTube in between. There's no Twitter algorithm. There's no Facebook algorithm. There's no social media algorithm ranking content. You just get whatever they choose to send out, and you can decide what to do with it. Thunderbird and other advanced email programs, you can set up filters. So maybe there's particular content you don't care about. You can detect that content, at least if there's a phrase or subject line that you can identify. You could delete it or put it away in a archival folder where you might look once in a while, something like a spam folder, for example. You have all these options, and it's fully under your control. It's transparent because you create the filters. You know what the algorithm is because you designed it that's processing this content. So let's go ahead and give an example. So this is an early victim, and I'm using the term victim somewhat humorously, of the censorship. So Alex Jones was banned from YouTube and Facebook. He's very controversial. I've known about him for over, I'd say 10 years, well before he became particularly well known. He's always been kind of way out there and over the top. I'm not a big fan of his. I don't think he should have been banned, but he's pretty weird. However, he has, of course, an RSS feed, which is an old technology now, but that's the advantage. It's mature, it's proven technology, it's automatic in many website programs. It's very easy if you have a website to set up an RSS feed usually, and it's very easy to receive one. So he has all these different options, several of which appear to be his own companies, but this is his RSS feed. So what you can do is, in the case of this program, I'm on Windows 10 in the Firefox browser. I right-click, and I copy the link location, and that will be the feed, the RSS feed, and there are a couple different formats. So let's go to my feed subscriptions here, and this feed subscriptions dialog box comes up. For this section, what I do is I copy the feed just from my clipboard now, and these feeds typically have an URL like this, so it'll be typically the domain of the website. There may be something like feed or RSS or something like that, and then slash. Then sometimes this is just a name like this, or it can be something.xml or .rss. There's a couple different forms. You enter it in here, and you will add it. I want to make another comment on how I set these up by default. I have the program check for the articles not frequently, but every 3 days. Why do I do that? I want to control when I read this stuff. I don't want to be distracted by it in the middle of the day or at some time when I'm working or dealing with family or personal matters. I want to control when I look at it. I want to make it like the old days of broadcast television where I would say at night, maybe after dinner, we watch TV. So we can localize the disruption or the distraction from the content to a time when I want to deal with it. And I can do that by checking for articles every 3 days, for example, and typically once a day at the time I choose, I'll do a get messages, which I will show for everything, and I look through it. Let's go ahead and add the RSS feed. All right, so he has about 100 of these queued up, and they show up. They're downloaded, everything's fine. Now I have him in my RSS feeds in this home blogs and news feed section. So here we go. And these are them, and it shows that they haven't been read. And I'm not going to go through all of these here. And you have the option, of course, typically with so many, you will look at a few of them and mark the folder read. I want to show what I meant by get messages. So here, if I click on the home blogs and news feeds header here, and I'm going to click guest messages. So I would typically do this at some time, perhaps in the evening, that I've set aside to read through content. Remember, a lot of this certainly news and political content can outrage you. It can produce an emotional reaction. It can be very distracting if it's arriving at random times. Probably most of the people reading this, if they've been drawn into the coronavirus pandemic, which is very hard to avoid, you're well aware that it's hard to pull away from this stuff. But you want to do that. You want to be able to localize it in time. Give yourself time to get over it. Give yourself time to think about it, to sleep on it. Not be reacting in real time to frightening headlines and frightening pictures and images, thumbnails of videos that are usually designed to get your emotions going, get you angry. What we need to do with these technologies is not only get around the censorship, which often reinforces fanatical ideology. It reinforces our preconceived notions instead of challenging them so we think clearly. But we also want to contain and control with these technologies like Thunderbird or new ones we may come up with. We want to contain and control the outrage, the emotion that blinds us to what's going on and makes it hard for us to think clearly about what's going on. So let's go ahead and hit get messages. I'm not sure if anything's going to show up. Yeah, a few things are showing up. So a couple of comments on this. I subscribe to a couple of sites here. Breitbart in particular puts out an awful lot of content. So I don't want to be constantly hit with it. I'd be bombarded by them like every hour, every few minutes. And this is true of a lot of these news and pseudo-news sites, the bigger ones. Okay. And Just the News isn't as bad. They're a little bit more sane than Breitbart, but they're also kind of on the right side of the political spectrum. And those are them for now. So I choose when in the day, when I read this content and when I'm going to deal with it. So try to set aside a good time, find a time for you. I don't have to do it every day either. I could set it up to do it once a week. And then when I've processed through all of this content for the day, as a general rule, I mark all folders read. Because a lot of times I might just check a headline and say that doesn't look that interesting. So that's the basic idea of adding an RSS feed. And I also have a way to handle mailing lists, which is done in conjunction with this email account here. I'll show that a little bit later in the video. But for now, that's how I do the RSS feeds. Just to recap, RSS gives you a way to get the content directly from the banned or shadow banned or deprecated source, unedited, unmeddled with by Facebook's algorithms or Google's algorithms or YouTube's algorithms. You get what they're saying. You decide what to do with it. You can set up filters, and I'll show some examples of that shortly. And I already have some filters set up here to process things. So some of those filters could delete particular topic. Maybe I don't want to hear about Alex Trebek, for example. I could delete him and just not see that content at all. Other content that's important to me, I could put it in a high priority folder. So there's a lot of freedom here to set up your processing of this content the way you want, in a way that works best for you. It helps you to contain the content that distracts you or disrupts your life or causes problems. Certainly, I recommend, as I try to do, to look at a wide range, both mainstream and outside of the mainstream. Here I'm going to show the message filters associated with my disposable email address I use to subscribe to mailing lists of various potentially banned websites. So let's click on Manage Message Filters. So I already have 4 of them set up for 4 mailing lists that I subscribe to. And we can actually edit them or delete them or whatever. Let me click Edit, and this may take a little while. So this is the filter rules dialog box, which allows, in this case, I brought it up by editing. One of the issues with Thunderbird is that the creation and editing of the filters takes a surprisingly long period of time. It took over 10 seconds for this to come up. That's a problem. I'm able to work around with it and deal with it, but it's frustrating, and I have not found a fix for that. That may not occur to you if your computer is different, but it is something I've noticed. It seems to slow down as things get more involved. You have more email programs, more archived messages, etc. What I've done here is I say if the message I get ends for the domain of the website I subscribe to, then I move the message to a folder over here. So in this case, it's in this together mailing list. So I'm not going to actually edit it, but also notice that I could add other rules here besides from. I can select and do all sorts of different things. Look at the subject line, the content, and I can do many different things. I could delete the message. I could turn it into junk. I can manipulate it in different ways. So let's just leave it at that. Actually, I'm going to cancel it so I don't change it accidentally. And we'll close that. And now I want to look over here at the actual in this together mailing list. Right now I just have the initial subscription message from subscribing to this website in this. But these would be automatically routed here. And we can set this up with a time to check the website, or excuse me. So let me see if we've got that here. So what I did here, as I did with the RSS feeds, is I check for new messages every few days. So 3,000 minutes is over 2 days. And the purpose of doing that, again, is to allow me to control when I read these mailing lists. And I can do a get messages here. So just to remind people, I've created a special email address, which is different from my business and personal emails, to allow me to receive the mailing lists. And so worst case, I could always get rid of this email if I have trouble, too much spam gets sent to it or there are problems I can't deal with it. It's separate from these other emails. And it also allows me to control when this one is checked. I certainly want to check my personal and business email several times a day. I want that to happen automatically. People need to get in touch with me. Whereas with these news sources and other content, I'd want to check them as I do with these at certain times of the day, or maybe a few times a week, or even less frequently. I might want to completely avoid them for a couple of weeks vacation, for example. All those options are available. So that demonstrates how to set up a filter to process a mailing list, a subscription to a website where they're emailing something to you. They're emailing their content or emailing links to their videos. In order to effectively combat the censorship, the shadow banning, the manipulation of search results with Thunderbird, one needs a broad selection of non-mainstream RSS feeds or mailing lists. That's obviously up to the user to try to figure out what that is. One thing that can make that easier is instead of sharing a single website or a single mailing list subscription, one can have a whole group, and that's possible with the RSS feeds. For example, Thunderbird can import a lot of stuff, a lot of content from other programs. It can import mail messages, address books, feed subscriptions, which I'm going to talk about, preferences, and filters. Let me show how to export. So you can export. So for this section in my Thunderbird, I can export the RSS feed simply by clicking on it here in this feed subscriptions, clicking export. And what I'm going to do is put this on my desktop for demonstration. So this is called an OPL file. It's human readable. You can look at it with a text editor, and I'll show that. And it contains a form of XML which lists the different RSS feeds. So let me go ahead and save that. And we'll click this, and we'll minimize this. And here we go. Okay, so what I'm going to do with this is edit with Notepad This is a kind of souped up version of Notepad, but any text editor will work. You can see that it's essentially a text file. It is human readable. It's a little technical looking. This is XML, which is a derivative of HTML. And you can see all of my RSS feeds, all this information is in here. So you can import this into your Thunderbird or indeed other programs. It can be any RSS reader that supports OPML import. So this is a complete list of the RSS feeds that I'm subscribed to. And so instead of having to go manually through 30, 40, let alone hundreds or thousands of RSS feeds, you can import one of these. And I will put this in a link to this in the show notes for the video, and any articles related to this. I'll include this just as an example. Obviously, you have to apply your own editorial standards, whether you want any particular one of these. As I have said before, the presence of something here is not an endorsement, nor is the absence of something necessarily any kind of statement about it. It's just, this is what I happen to look at. It's important to look at and consider points of view that you don't agree with to properly evaluate it. You need to hear all sides of an issue. You also need to consider the possibility that all sides are wrong in significant or important ways, which has happened many times in human history. And it's probably happening right now. So let me go back to Thunderbird. So again, that is an illustration of exporting, and you can also, as this thing, I'm not going to do the import here, but it has this import capability. It can import these OPML files. If you created a section like this, and this is an account, it's not really an account, but it is treated as an account that you create in Thunderbird, like the email accounts. You create one of these, and then you can import the OPML file and immediately populate it with dozens or hundreds or thousands, perhaps going forward, as people share not individual links or individual links or individual websites. In order to deal with this kind of shadow banning, we need to shift the mindset to one of sharing indexes, or like sharing an encyclopedia, as a way of getting around this censorship, so that we can search and find and discover things. So you would import these things. It doesn't, in general, mean that you're going to read them all, but it means you're going to search them for the relevant information. People need to develop that sort of mentality in order to get around the heavy censorship, where they are sharing systems or compilations of information that ideally represent a conceptual diversity, that different points of view are represented, different facts are represented that seem to contradict one another. It's a reality that the facts can support different points of view depending on which facts you happen to look at. And I'm talking about facts, not lies or errors, but actual facts. When facts seem to support two opposing or different contradictory points of view, it's because we're missing some deeper understanding. The famous ancient example of this is the story of the three blind men and the elephant, where one of them touches the trunk and thinks it's like a snake. One of them touches the leg and says it's like a trunk. And I think one of them touches like one of the tusks and thinks it's like a sharp, pointy object. They're all right, and they're all wrong. This concludes this video presentation. If you like this video, please click like. Please click subscribe and the notification bell if you would like to receive more content from us. You can avoid internet censorship by subscribing directly to our RSS news feed. Please consider sharing the link by email and on your website or blog, in addition to liking, upvoting, or sharing on increasingly censored, advertising beholden, big company social media. We have encountered such censorship. Mathematical software is developing algorithms and software to automate data analysis, reducing the risks of costly errors and increasing the predictive power of the results. You can support our work financially by subscribing on our Patreon page, https://www.patreon.com/mathsoft, or scanning the QR code in the lower right corner.